Welcome back to Big Fish in the Middle Kingdom, part of the Migration Media Network. I'm Brendan Davis, your host, and this week's guest is Elliott Zaagman. Now, I'm going to lift this directly from his LinkedIn profile because it says it better than I ever could. Elliott is best known as an executive coach, corporate trainer, and a writer. He focuses on how Chinese leaders and organizations interact with their global employees and the public. His focus is on leadership development, HR, and PR, and Elliott is both an enthusiastic evangelist for and a very honest critic of China's tech industry. Now, he is wicked smart and insightful, very funny, and we have what I think is one of the most real conversations that I've ever had on this show. We kind of range from the curious debt structures in many Chinese businesses to what I said, the notable underrepresentation of Asian faces at the Bilderberg meetings, which is, of course, by design. Anyway, we had a great talk, a lot of fun, kind of silly sometimes, but mostly pretty spot on, and I really appreciated his insights and him sharing them so candidly with me here. Now, this week's show is sponsored by the Complete Podcasting Course, my new learning program on udemy.com. You can find it in the link in the show notes, and if you want to check out the course, you can get a discount coupon from me to get the course for only $10 US or the equivalent. Just contact me, and I will hook you up. But now, without further ado, we have a nice long interview. Please enjoy my interview with Elliott Zaagman. Well, I am very happy to be here today with Elliott Zaagman. How are you, man?
I'm good. Thanks for having me here, Brennan.
I'm really glad to have you on. As I discovered once we started chatting, I am more familiar with your work than I even thought I was. But my traditional first question is going to explain that to the folks listening at home. Please give me the short version of who you are, where you're from, and what brought you to China. Okay. And then we'll go from there.
My name is Elliott Zaagman.
Got that part covered? Okay.
But a lot of people say Zaagman because there's two A's, but I'm from Michigan, right? So we have to have the good nasally Midwestern accent. So it's Zaagman.
Yeah, you meant I didn't want to do that. He tried to sucker me in. I'm like, I don't want to be the guy. Somebody's gonna be mad if I do it.
Anyway, so yeah, I grew up in Grand Rapids, Michigan, like I said. And then after school, I graduated from college in 2008, and it was 2008. I didn't really want to try to get a normal job, and I wanted to travel. So I joined a teaching program that would pay for your flight and set you up with an apartment and everything like that. But you had to teach English for them for a year. So I came here, and then I knew how to say ni hao, xie xie, and that was about it. And I lived in Wangjing back when Wangjing was kind of the Nongsun, everyone would be like, "What the fuck? I'm not gonna go out to Wangjing to see you." Now Wangjing is like in the middle of the city.
I was gonna say that's like central.
Yeah. And I went to the Olympics. I had a great time, and for my bachelor's degree, I did sociology. And I still just kind of love the dynamics of people. I love social science, and I just am fascinated by all of it. And if you're into that kind of stuff, there's really no better place to be than China. So I just got really fascinated and just sucked in by the stories that people had, the lives that they were living, just the social phenomena that were going on here. So then I went back to the U.S. I got married. I went to grad school, and then my wife and I came back here in 2011. And I worked for Pearson. Back then, they had a series of e-learning products, like corporate training products, and they also sold all of Wall Street English's corporate contracts. So I was on a small sales team to sell all of their corporate contracts, and it was not the best job I've ever had, but it was really interesting because I got to meet all these different businesses and got to get to know all these people. I worked with the National Development Reform Commission. I did
That sounds important.
Yeah, it's an important bureau. And I did like a cross-cultural leadership program for them. I worked with Lenovo for a while. I was Liu Changdong's English teacher, so Richard Liu, who is
wow.
Yeah.
Okay, I don't normally do a very topical show, but as we record this, he's in the paper for all the wrong reasons.
Yeah, exactly.
The CEO and founder of JD.com, and you guys can search the rest.
Yeah.
Wherever you have Google, Google it.
No, they know plenty about it here.
Yeah, they do.
But yeah, so I got some really good opportunities to kind of see different sides of the Chinese economy, and yeah, it was it was a good way to get my foot in the door. And then I started my own company with some colleagues when we left in the end of 2014, 2015. I worked for DHL for a few years. I did doing some training programs for them. And I also worked for Leeco when they did their kind of global expansion. And that was very interesting. They had just borrowed a ton of money and expanded into so many different areas, including the U.S. Hired hundreds of people in the U.S. Yeah, and then so I joined this company that was just kind of shooting off like a rocket ship, and then all of a sudden the credit tightened up and the company just collapsed.
And that never happens here.
No, never. But it was just really interesting because I was like, what the hell? Like, how does this happen?
Yeah.
Right? And it's happened with a lot of companies.
And how does it happen?
Well, that's a very interesting story.
All right. We can come back to it if you want to.
We can get back to that. But one thing that was really cool about that, and I really appreciated it, is that when they were expanding, they were hiring lots of people from a lot of very prestigious companies who had great experience, really interesting folks, and I got to know a lot of people. And then when the company fell apart, then everyone went everywhere. So I had friends at every company. And then I started working and doing, I still do a lot of this now, is doing advisory services, consulting, some PR work as well for, and coaching services for a lot of tech executives. So I've ended up kind of meeting a lot of these founders and CEOs and working with them quite closely. And there's some people I respect and some people I like, some people I don't respect, some people I respect, some people I don't like. But the good ones you kind of like and respect at the same time. And,
sure.
And
that's probably true anywhere.
Become good friends.
Nice.
So yeah, and then I also I started writing about a year ago, and that's kind of how most people know me. Is that I write about Chinese tech industry. I write about it both in in English, where I write everything in English, but a lot of it gets translated to Chinese, and that's where most of my readers actually come from. So I write for a website called Huxiu. So I write about usually it's Chinese companies or Chinese businesses and kind of looking at certain case studies or a lot of times it's cultural or leadership issues or just kind of breaking down some of these issues from my perspective, which a lot of the Chinese audience doesn't really get to see all the time.
Well, and there's so many things we could talk about. Sometimes the show is 40 minutes, sometimes it's almost 2 hours, and we'll probably be in between somewhere today because you are plugged right into the heart of kind of what makes this country run in a lot of ways with the tech industry and the business community, specifically tech related. So your insights are I think very valuable. But I mean, I'm surprised that you've quote unquote only been writing for about a year or so because you seem like you're all over the place to me. I mean, you're very prolific. It seems like, and I know you write on the English language, SubChina and TechNode, right?
Yeah. So I write for most of my stuff you can read on TechNode, but I also write for Tech in Asia, and the Lowy Institute, the Australian think tank. I've written a little bit for the Jamestown Foundation, which is a DC think tank, and some on SubChina as well. It's because I'm not a very I guess one word you could use is stubborn, but I like to write what I like to write about. So I like to write what I like to think about. So in sometimes that's really good for one outlet and it's not good for another. And
right.
So I like to work with a series of editors and say, okay, what do you think about this idea? What do you think about this idea? What do you think about this idea? And sometimes it's really good for one outlet, not good for another. So, but yeah, lately I've been writing a lot for Lowy. They're the interpreter because I write a lot about Huawei in Australia. Huawei's been a big issue in Australia because they banned Huawei's 5G.
For the similar reasons as in the States?
Yeah. So a lot of it is national security issues, although whether or not it's actually a national security concern, that's a whole different ball of wax. But yeah, I mean, I'm interested in kind of how Chinese businesses run. One, because I'm interested in, like I said, social science and kind of how these organizations work, especially when they come in contact with the outside world. But also... it is a lens through which you can look at the Chinese world that is more acceptable to write about within China, right? So if you write about society or politics, that's not going to be okay. But if you write about, so let's say I write about the leadership style of a certain executive. Now that has broader political and social ramifications and implications to it, but it's a context through which it's acceptable. So if we talk about, personality cults, for example, right? And we talk about, okay, look at how this person, because they kind of built this up, this is how they had trouble getting information, or they, you can kind of apply that to the broader political sphere at times, but because it's not about a person, or it's not about, you don't have to point directly at the issue. You can say, because it's not only about that, it's about,
there's shareholders, there are other stakeholders involved at the inside and outside of company. And
exactly.
It affects people who use a product, who are relying on a product, who invest in the company.
And also it's something that, it allows people we can look at, different issues in Chinese society and life, and in a lens that is more acceptable for the Chinese audience.
What would you say? I mean, there's some certain things that would be the quote unquote obvious answers to this, and maybe you blow through them en route to getting to the heart of the matter for you, but that makes it unique for you. But what would you say have been what are the tricky parts of doing that, basically, especially for you as a Laowai? That's my question.
Yeah.
Without trying to wrap it up more elegantly and make me sound smarter than I actually am.
Right.
What are the how do you feel about that, for one thing? Because there's obviously a weight and the baggage that you have to deal with to get to doing your job.
Yeah, there's three things. Three basically layers you have to get across. One is you have to say, is it a good article? Like, so are you making a good point? Do you have good stories, or is it good writing? Do people want to read it? Secondly, it is, you have to get past the censors, right? So, you don't want to worry about stuff getting blocked, which it has, and that's, especially if you're a foreigner, they're going to be less tolerant, I think, of me than others. But it's not going to come down on me. It's going to come down on the people around me, the Chinese people who support me, my publishers. Right. So they're not going to close down. I'm not. It's not skin off my back.
Well, but then there's no job for you, and it's people you care about, and it's
exactly.
It's food on your table.
I'm more worried about that. And then there's also do I have to think about my Chinese audience too? Like, if I think one thing that this has really helped me understand China is to know, look at the comment section. Like, what do people say? Do they agree with what I'm saying? Do they disagree? Why do they disagree? And it's made me see, and sometimes I see an uglier side of China, and sometimes I see a really encouraging side. There are a lot of times where they say stuff in the comment section that I can't say.
Yeah,
right? But
like you're trying to walk the line. But they'll say something because they can. It's
exactly.
I don't read. I mean, I speak enough to be social and chatty, but I can't read Chinese. But what I hear and what I hear commented on in translation, it seems like often those comments are kind of like the YouTube comments back in the States, which, in other words, they can be very nasty.
Yeah.
People don't always hold back.
Yeah. Oh, that's for sure. But also, yeah, it is. They are not always nice. But it's like, for example, with my editor, he's a Chinese guy. He also translates for me. But there are a lot of times where I'll send stuff and he'll be like, "Why do you want to post that? Or why do you want to say that? Or I don't think that's true." And he really makes me he challenges me in a good way, where I'll have to think about the assumptions that I do make about this country, and it's made me think about the perspective that people have here, what the issues that they deal with, in everyday life, and why they're sensitive about this issue. Why, if I criticize this, would they have a problem? Why do they want me to talk more about this? It's been a real eye opener.
What are some of the things that you have learned that surprised you, just in general? I'm sure it's many things, and there probably a lot of those are smaller moments that are more personal, but what are some of the things you've learned that you could, maybe share with people in a broader context?
That's a good...
Like assumptions versus reality, that kind of thing.
One thing... I've been really surprised. I've been both encouraged and dismayed from the process. Which one do you want to hear first?
Your choice. Free range answer time.
Well, let's start with the negative and then go with the positive.
Yeah, let's do that. Listen on a positive note.
So
I like that.
The negative side, I have been, to be honest, I've been really taken aback by some racism.
But I thought there was no racism in China.
Yeah, they're not. So for example, I wrote a piece about, there were a series of different kind of flops, or snafus, or I don't know what the right word, faux pas that some Chinese companies were making, particularly around the issue of race, where it's really
Yes.
just not, it's not necessarily
Like the laundry detergent.
Yeah,
like that.
the laundry detergent ad, what was it, that museum where they had the photos of Africans.
Yeah, wow.
And just kind of issues that actually are now coming out, particularly about sexism as well.
Sure.
But just this, basically what I was saying was not, I wasn't saying, Chinese are racist or sexist or has these problems. It's saying, the issue is someone should stop that. Somebody should be in that meeting and saying, wait, no.
Maybe that's not a good idea.
Exactly. So that was my argument. It was if that, I think it's for a lot of Chinese companies, especially globalizing ones that have to reach an outside audience. I think a lot of them can be quite reluctant to hire a diverse set of eyes, right? So people from different backgrounds, and to be able to kind of include their thinking and perspectives in the decision making. And so I wrote about that and saying, this is the problem when when you have a uniform kind of identity, right? Usually a Chinese boys club in charge of your company, and then also everyone's just so busy, kind of kowtowing to the leader that even when some people do see stuff, they don't say anything.
Right.
And
they don't want to make a way that washes away their hongbao.
Exactly. Well, exactly. I mean, or that I think for a lot of it can be kind of a patronage system in a lot of these companies.
Right.
And it's just it's China's not the only country that has it like that.
Sure.
But so the case that I was making was, these are real world problems that these companies face, right? And here's a way to that would help solve them. The response that I got from the Chinese audience, I sent it when it was published in English. It was like, oh, this is, of course, right?
I remember the piece, actually.
It's almost too on the nose, right? Or just too obvious, right?
Yeah, in the West, you were like, why do I have to say these things are an issue?
Exactly. It's like,
it becomes reportage instead of opinion.
Yeah. But in China, there was just, in the comments section, my editors had to delete a lot of them because it was real, like half of them were Chinese people aren't racist. Like, how dare you say this? Or they would say stuff like, we never were colonizers, we never had slavery, which is
Sure,
true.
there's a point about the sensitivity issues, specifically around black folks, that they don't have the same history that we do in the West.
So in some ways there isn't...
I'm not trying to excuse it, but I understand that argument intellectually.
Yeah, exactly.
But they do have a version of the internet, though.
Yeah.
Anyway, please continue.
But the idea was that what I'm saying is, I'm not saying that these people are racist or sexist. I'm saying that whenever you're dealing with people that are not like you need more diverse opinions. But some of it were, Chinese people aren't racist. Others were, black people are like monkeys. Like just the most really kind of discouraging kind comments.
Yeah, even your face, just for the audience, your face, even as you tell me, I'm like, yeah, your face, like, I can't believe I've got to say this, but yeah.
Yes.
It's like,
so just
it's just so cringe-inducing.
Just really, so that was very discouraging to me.
It's kind of like a reality check on the state of evolution currently, or
just like just it's the same in the American internet. You get your alt-right folks. So and I think Chinese people are just really defensive about being
they don't want a foreigner telling them anything. Yeah, which I appreciate.
I'm wondering if how I could. I mean, there are ways I could have made the case better. I don't know.
But what did you learn? Yeah, what did you take away from that? I mean, in terms of,
I think that they're sensitive about the. I think Chinese people have trouble. Well, there is a part of it is a narrative that is true, and another part of it is a narrative that is built in order to maintain a sense of solidarity and power, which is that they are constantly being attacked and criticized from the outside.
And they have a point with that.
Yeah, well, but in some ways, yes, in some ways, no, right? So they are in some ways, and I think there's a lot of unfair attacks, but they also. There's a lot of times where they don't do anything to help themselves either.
It's not a point. It's not a point that wins the argument. I'm just saying they have a point.
Yeah, exactly. Like for example, a friend of mine is she is Kenyan British, all right, and she works a lot with Africa relations, like China-Africa relations.
And and as we record this has been the giant conference going on. The China-Africa,
so she's very busy.
Stuff is it's blowing up right now.
But after this. She after the do you remember the Chinese New Year gala this year where they had that skit with where that woman was in blackface?
Sure.
Right,
sure. So it's like 2018, right? Okay,
yeah. I mean, and then
I started a hashtag China woke.
But the chat and all these group chats and everything was all about, I think people found it problematic, but then a lot of Chinese people were like, oh, you're being too sensitive, right? Chinese people aren't racist. And what she said was, why no one said, because she's a black woman, she said, no one said to me, why is this offensive? Why does this bother me? And that's, I think that's the... Like,
is that like missing element? Is like not having that curiosity to find out?
Or the empathy, and I think part of it is when you're so used to defending yourself all the time, you don't learn that. And I think that's one of the things that's been frustrating is like most defenses that they have and most criticisms of me, I can usually pretty much buy into. It's the when it's the perceived lack of willingness for some people to, ask more questions, be empathetic, seek truth from facts. So, that kind of stuff can be a little disheartening at times. But I also can understand it in some ways.
Well, you said there was a bright side in terms of the other answer, the alternative things you've learned that have been, revelatory in a good way.
Yeah. Well, first of all, there's been, a lot of times I will get, really, a lot of readers, a lot of shares. And a lot of times when I'll talk about, I talk a lot about organizational psychology and how, certain, suggest ways that, organizations could change how they do things or leaders or teams could change how they do things, in order to better manage groups of people, and I think a lot of people in China deal with shitty bosses, and I think people really seem to empathize with that, especially young people.
Totally.
People everywhere deal with shitty bosses.
But there's a special breed here.
Yeah, exactly.
Any Chinese friend of mine has bent my ear about it more than once.
Yes, exactly. And I think that writing about power dynamics, and with a sense of like, well, this is what works best, or this is what kind of justice is. I think people seem to really appreciate that, as long as I'm not too preachy. As long as I'm saying, okay, well, this is what is. I have to write on behalf of. I have to show a love and affection for people. If I don't, it's going to be a problem. I think one that was probably the warmest for me is like when I left China, I kind of moved all my stuff out. I wrote a form of the Why I'm Leaving China letter. It only got published in Chinese because I so many people write those in English. That
They do.
I was like, how do I? So, but it was good. So I wrote about just kind of like what I learned from people, and like it was just different stories of different relationships and different kind of people that I've known and what they kind of taught me, and also kind of some of the struggles that I had, but how my conclusion was like, I don't always like it. Some days I like it, some days I don't. But like, you can still love it without, to love something is to accept it as it is, right? And I think that's the biggest thing that I've learned. And I got so it was kind of like from the bottom of my heart to try to like kind of reconcile with this, this place that has been, so meaningful to me, but also very difficult. It got just this incredible response, and just an outpouring of love, and a lot of like friends that I had, contacted me, and a lot of like, pretty, well-known like CEOs that I worked with kind of shared it on their WeChat feed and talked about how much they like me and what I meant to them and stuff. And that was just like an outpouring of love and appreciation. And that meant a lot. And then also just like, there's just like some stories that I'll break too and kind of piece some stuff together. And, like I wrote about BYD recently. They've kind of had these scandals that I'm just like, well, what's going on here? Mm. And I wrote about it and kind of also wrote about my own perspective of it and being like, okay, well, how am I supposed to view what this company says? Because there have been a lot of companies that have had similar problems like this, and they're all, this is what their trend has been.
Right.
So, so I wrote about it from a very personal perspective, just trying to evaluate them and like whether or not I should give them the benefit of the doubt. And that was, I think, my most read article ever. I didn't think it was going to be that much, but so I think that people really, people like everywhere, they have a sense of fairness, sense of justice, and if you show respect for them, and if you show that you care about them, and then they'll appreciate your perspective.
So you mentioned having left China, and of course you're sitting here in my in my beautiful home studio right now. You're in China again. For the sake of people who don't know this, you are currently located in Thailand.
Well, yes? I'm not currently located in Thailand, but
okay,
I'm based out of Thailand.
To be specific, your toothbrush.
Right.
Your main toothbrush, not the
my
travel
main
ones.
toothbrush.
I'm not helping at all. Right. Your sock drawer, it's in Thailand.
Yeah, exactly. So my wife is a United Nations diplomat. So she got posted down in Thailand, and I had been going back and forth for a while, and there came a point where I was just like, okay, I gotta choose a home. So what I did is I told all my clients that want to work with me, I said, I can come here every now and then, but you gotta be willing to work with me remotely, and that's why I started writing more too, it's good. I find it to be, they say, I always say the Chinese know how to work and the Thais know how to live.
Yes, I like that.
So it is, after being in Beijing for so long, it is a welcome change of pace. And I still do, everything I do for work is kind of still surrounded and focused on China. But it is, I do enjoy life down there.
I have quite a few friends who live there or have lived there, and I've never been. That's actually on my list. I may be going sooner than later for a visa run. Mm-hmm. But what are the main just day-to-day differences for you? I mean, let's.
I do well. One thing I don't like is I don't speak Thai. I speak Chinese. So coming back
doesn't
here,
help you that much.
Yeah, exactly. Well, actually, there's a lot of Chinese tourists, right. So I always try to practice my Chinese with them.
See some people with like the hats and the flag.
Exactly. Exactly. Although there are more, especially in my neighborhood, it's kind of like a hipster neighborhood. So there's all these like, you'll see like usually like young, 20-something girls, often from Wuhan for some reason. Really? Yeah, I don't know why. so I don't like that I can't speak Thai, but the food is incredible.
Yes.
The food is also incredible here, but there's just food on the street, food. So I eat too much. I have a pool.
Wow.
I have. I like the pace of life, and I also like. There is something about. You can say it for however many reasons, but especially here in Beijing, like people don't open the doors for you as much,
Yeah.
I feel like oftentimes people in China don't take the time to slow down and acknowledge the humanity of other people.
Yeah.
And when you have 1.4 billion people, there's reasons why. There's plenty of reasons
Exactly.
why. But one thing that I've just noticed in Thailand is just like there's just a general sense of like respect and acknowledgement that people tend to give to everyone. And it might be just that I'm a foreign tourist and they have a tourist economy.
Yeah, you don't look very Thai. You don't look Chinese or Thai. So
right. So, but it is something that they tend to act towards a way that they tend to act towards each other too. And I think that is I appreciate that. And after being in China for so long and being so frustrated, when you're on the subway or when you have those moments, and that doesn't happen so much in Thailand. So I like that.
But as you said, you're living very much in China, even if your body and your soul and your wife are there in Thailand. You're physically enjoying being in Thailand, but then your brain is very heavily in China. And writing is a way to, I'm sure, both express yourself, but also keep you in front of the people who you're talking to or talking about. Right?
Yeah, exactly. And it's a way that I can do it all remotely as well.
Sure.
But yeah, that's a big thing, is that it keeps me involved with everybody, keeps me talking to everybody. And I love it. Like, everything that I've done and everything that is really, I'm passionate about has to do with learning and then kind of sharing what I've learned and engaging with people about it. So that's what I really like. And when you write, that's what you do.
And so tech is this heavy focus for you with your writing and your advisory work and all of that. We were having a really fun conversation before we got over here in front of the microphone, and some of that will stay in airplane mode, as it should, as it was decreed in the prophecy. But we were talking about something specifically. I want to see if we can kind of rekindle that for the sake of sharing it with people, because you had some interesting thoughts about some general comments about what the cultural dynamic is. And this kind of this problem that these companies find themselves getting into related to debt, and there are cultural issues about why things are allowed to go on and whatnot. Let me try to figure out a good way to ask you this as a question, but you know what I'm talking about, right?
Yeah.
What would you say are some of the? To me, this is in the category of growing pains of China becoming more international, because you mentioned people not having the issues with stopping to hold the door. There are a lot of reasons for that. It's not part of the history. It's not, there's 1.3.999 billion people behind them trying to get through the same door.
Yeah.
Making up for lost time.
Yeah.
And then just not having the role models to think, this should maybe be done a different way.
Yeah.
What I see, here's my semi-educated take on it, which may prompt you to say something more insightful. My point of view as a non-business degree person, but just who's engaged and paying attention, is I see that there are a lot of people, a lot of companies, and which are, of course, organizations run by people, that are attempting and are competing at an international level, but in a system they did not create.
Yes.
They're people who didn't make these rules.
Yeah.
They're not part. There aren't a lot of Asian faces at the Bilderberger convention, as far as I see from the InfoWars. Kidding. Don't read InfoWars anymore. Sorry, that's a callback to us laughing about Alex Jones. But you know what I'm saying? They were not part. The Asian countries in general, and China specifically, was not part of creating these matrices that with which the international commerce is flowing. Yet, because of scale and size, they have some of the biggest companies, and so they're trying to interface. So when they're just contained within China, that's one reality. But when you try to deal with the outside world, all of a sudden it matters what your CEO does after hours, right?
Right.
So
Yeah.
I've set you up well enough for you to talk for 10 minutes.
Yeah. Well, I mean, first of all, we could say that, I mean, in the same way, China didn't build the system, but China has benefited very much from this system.
Completely.
Especially, in like Guangdong, they have, the Chinese, long before we knew what capitalism was, the Chinese have been doing capitalism well.
Exactly.
So I think that there is a lot to be said about that. But yeah, their system...
Well, mercantilism of thousands of years ago doesn't necessarily intersect with the corporate world 2018.
Yeah, exactly. So, I mean, there's a lot... there is a lot of... the Chinese system is a system not built for the world that we're in, but they have adjusted it in ways that are remarkable and ways that have caused them to be successful in the world that they're in.
Right.
But also, there are ways that where I think even in some ways that are even more becoming more pronounced over the last 10 years. Ways that they are becoming even more cut off from the rest of the world. So most obviously, and this is to their benefit and also to their detriment. So the most obvious thing is the internet, right? So how do you have, in some ways they've incubated these companies, right? So, Tencent, WeChat didn't have to compete with WhatsApp and Facebook. They were able to grow. By having this, the wallet kind of incubated these companies, but it also created an environment where they can't always, that is run by different rules in the rest of the world. And it's not just the tech companies. We've seen this. I've been writing about this more recently. It's the Chinese economy in general is what has happened since 2008. If you're looking into it, you see a lot of these kind of weird, fucked upness. A lot of it stems from that. And that when the global financial crisis hit in 2008, the Chinese were, they acted very decisively. They stimulated their economy, and they didn't go into recession like the rest of the world did. But they haven't really stopped stimulating their economy ever since. So I believe 63% of all monetary expansion, so all cash that has been put into the world economy, has been put in by Chinese banks since 2008. That's more than, so a lot has been talked about, a lot has been discussed about how, the U.S. economy with quantitative easing after 2008, dumped trillions of dollars into the Chinese economy. But the U.S. economy or world economy. But since 2008, the Chinese banks have done more through lending than the European Central Bank, U.S. Fed, and the Japanese Central Bank combined. So what they've done is they've just lent and lent and lent and lent, because the infrastructure boom kind of is really over in reality, but there are all these companies, these construction companies, infrastructure companies that have employed so many people in China, and so much of the economy is based off of it. But 15 years ago, you build a bridge, that bridge is usually needed, right? Right. And it's good investment. Now a lot of that has already been done, so a lot of it is less value creating investment. It is really just propping up a lot of these companies. So if you go to these 4th and 5th tier cities, a lot of them are built around a big state-owned company. And very often, almost always, those companies are not really making a profit. They have too much capacity and they're not doing enough. But the government needs to keep them afloat because they can't close down these companies. Because if you close a minqi, a private company, a lot of the people that work for them are migrants. They go back home. If you close a state-owned company that these cities are built on, their tax base goes away. Their people revolt, right? So there are a lot of vested interests to keep these things open. So they just keep lending to them. So the banks just lend to everybody. But what that does is it causes all these companies need to put that money somewhere, right? Where it can be invested somewhere. So they need to get some returns because they're just bringing on debt. So that's why we have they're investing in property, right? So that's why every company is also a real estate company.
Right.
Right. And now every company is also a tech company. Right.
Yeah.
So you'll see, what is it like? What the hell is a real estate company doing investing in tech?
Without getting into specifics, I've had more than one conversation with entertainment companies where they have built some kind of a real estate play. They've shoehorned that in to complicate and ultimately ruin what is otherwise a straightforward entertainment deal.
Right.
It's like, well, okay, if you want to do that, that's a separate thing, but it's a different mentality.
Well, it's because a lot of it is because it's been one of the only areas where where they've been able to get consistent returns, even though in a lot of these big cities in China, most people can't afford a house, right? You have buildings where they're only half occupied, because people just hold these houses, right? While roughly 1 million people in Beijing live underground because they can't afford a home.
1 million?
1 million is an estimate.
Really?
Yeah.
The people living down in the...
Yeah, they live like underneath the buildings. Yeah, in like the air raid shelters and the parking garages. Yeah. I saw that number a year or two ago. I know they pushed some people out of Beijing, but it's probably still quite a large number. So you have all this money floating around, right? So they've created all this money. They also kind of limit capital outflow. So it's hard to get money out. So there's just money floating around the Chinese economy. So everyone's like, where am I going to put it? Right? When the government can direct it, because the government can restrict, say, okay, people can only buy one house. And then they can point it to other places. So they say, okay, we want people to go into tech, right? So they've kind of led that herd, and then all this money has flown in. And in a lot of ways, it's really good because tech entrepreneurs need money.
Sure.
Right? But what it also does...
They usually need it with less conditions than it sometimes is given here.
Yeah. So much of this... What ends up happening is the good companies get overfunded. So you have these valuations that are kind of absurd, based on just the fact that, people will believe the hype, and because investing in Xiaomi is safer than investing in this random company that you don't know, because at least Xiaomi actually makes products. But when Xiaomi IPO'd this year, they said, and the kind of the bullish analysts said as well, that okay, well, Xiaomi should be valued between 80 billion and 100 billion, right? That's what all the analysts were saying. That's what everyone was hyping it up as. But they IPO'd with like a $50 billion, and now they're trading at less than that. And you're seeing this with a lot of these companies where the good ones are just overvalued. Yeah. Because they're valued based on promises that they haven't followed through. So Xiaomi, they say, okay, well, we're not just a hardware company, we're an internet services company, right? But they don't really make any money off internet services. They're really a hardware company. They're really just Lenovo with better, that's a newer, fresher face.
Yeah.
Right. And they don't have Lenovo's supply chain or Lenovo's global sales and distribution systems. And then what you have in addition to that is you have a lot of companies that are just complete Ponzi schemes. So you'll see this with P2P lending. A lot of these kind of fintech companies, really what they were is Ponzi schemes. So you'll see with peer-to-peer lending, it just recently collapsed. Basically, the whole peer-to-peer lending industry in China just collapsed. Basically, that's insane. That was $1 trillion industry.
Trillion?
Yeah,
jeez. By
some estimates. But the thing is, if I'm lending to you on a peer-to-peer network, a run should not be allowed. A run should not be possible.
Right.
Right?
Right.
Because I'm just lending to you and you're going to pay me back in a certain time. Right? But that's not how a lot of these work, because these people are, they're always thinking about, okay, well, how do we build on it? How do we build on it? And they're operating Ponzi schemes, basically. Yeah. They're, borrowing off the float that they've, that they have, and, doing all these kind of weird financial innovations that are, not healthy, and then this is what happens. And you're seeing with a lot of these blockchain companies too. People are interested in cryptocurrencies. They don't understand the technology very much. It's really easy to bullshit people, and a lot of them, it's a complete scam. And then we have legitimate companies that end up operating like Ponzi schemes because there's just so much money. And not enough incentives to actually, become profitable and actually have a legitimate business.
And they have to compete in an environment where this has become the new normal.
Exactly. So look at bike sharing.
Yeah.
Right. Bike sharing is a great example. So it started off as a great idea. It still is a good idea. Mm-hmm. I don't think most people, like using a Mobike or an OFO. Huh. The problem is that it's a classic example of it's a good idea. The government also says, we're going to name it one of our big four innovations. We're going to, give all this attention to it. So there's so much money floating around that, and people don't know how to invest really. They don't have a lot of good options. So they pour money into these companies. Right?
It's gotten the pat on the head and the gold star of approval. And this is a place we support this. This is a good thing.
Yeah. Exactly. So they said, okay, well, the government supports it, so it's a good bet, right? But then what happens is they need to compete with each other by gaining users,
right?
And then what we have is giant piles of bikes everywhere,
right? I think they should all consolidate. I've got a joke that I say. I think Blue Go-Go, Mobike, and OFO should all just be one company called Blue Mofo.
Yeah, well, I think I've worked more and I have more personal relationships with the Mobike people, but so I have a dog in their race, I guess. But I'm a fan of those people. Of at least some of their leaders.
That was just an excuse for me to tell you my joke.
But I think that they got acquired by Meituan, and I think that was the right move. I think it was because if you look at the situation with these bike shares, they're not profitable.
I don't know how they make money.
They don't.
How much do those bikes cost?
Well, exactly. It's not a profitable business model.
It's like a 1 Kwai per kilometer or per ride, basically. And
well, what they've been doing is they've been burning money to gain market share. They've been running. It's what we call 2 VC business models, where you're just trying to get more money, but you're not actually building a legitimate business. And what you are doing is you're even if you are not trying to run one, you're basically running a Ponzi scheme. Where your whole business is built around getting more investment in, right?
Right.
And the moment that the music stops, your company collapses. So right now we're seeing OFO basically collapsing. We saw Blue Go-Go collapse. But it's classic example of basically these companies are operating on a Ponzi scheme, even if they didn't want to from the very beginning. Yeah. And you'll see it with a lot of these companies when they globalize, right? They use globalization as a marketing ploy.
It's another place to put the money in to get the brand name, more cachet.
Yeah, exactly. It's just but it's not to get a brand name with consumers. It's to get a brand name with investors.
Right.
So
it's the reason that working on film projects, I've had people say, we should put in that Mel Gibson is going to direct the movie. Well, he's not. Well, I know, but people know he's a big star. Mm. Yeah, but he's not going to set foot on it. That doesn't matter. Yes, it does. Bye.
Right. So
I've had that conversation like 5 times.
But so much of this is directed around funding, right? Yeah. Which just leads to, it makes it so that so few of these companies are actually focusing on their users, or actually focusing on building a legitimate business model. And then you have good ones that just have too much money, right? And then so that they take the money that they can get, they build kind of a business around it. It's usually doing more than they really can do. They invest in areas that are probably unwise, right? And then the money stops and they have to close up.
Yeah.
So it's not that this never happens in Silicon Valley. It does too. But the thing is, and we're seeing this throughout the economy in China, it is all the lending going into these areas where they don't have the they can't really make it value creation. So it's just, a lot of it is just money just to support, just to put businesses on life support. So in researching a recent piece, one of the people I was interviewing said this about Chinese tech, which I think is an interesting point. It's not entirely true, but he said, it's basically a jobs program.
Got it. But yeah,
which is not entirely true. I mean,
sure.
They are, so China has a youth unemployment issue, right? A lot of people.
What is it roughly? Do you know?
I don't know the statistic, but they've had a youth unemployment problem where they're well-educated kids that either they come back from overseas or they leave a good school and they can't get a good job. And so what are they going to say? Okay, well, we have an inefficient state-owned company. Should we just get them do-nothing jobs there, right? Or should we encourage tech and entrepreneurship, innovation sector, where some of them, they could try to learn how to do it, and then maybe
you might get a new Apple out of this.
Exactly.
You keep throwing enough darts at the
wall.
wall.
I mean, it's a smart move, but the problem is it's not really market driven.
Yeah.
So you get a lot of these companies that are scamming investors out of their money. You get a lot of the last thing that a lot of them are thinking about is actually their product or their engineering, which leads to a lot of crap. But then you also get a few really good ones. But it does leave, if you're looking at these companies, it's hard to be really optimistic about them because there are so many of them that are just that when you actually look into it, you're like, oh, you're not a real company.
Let me ask you a hypothetical, and I wouldn't ask you to, I don't think you would, but I wouldn't ask you to put actual names of companies on this. But let's talk about this more generally. Let's say that I was fortunate enough to have $1 million to give you to help me. Let's say you were putting on your financial advisor hat. What would you do in China if you had a chunk of liquidity of roughly let's call it 10 million RMB. Let's call it about 10 million RMB roughly.
I'd get it out. No, I'm sorry, that's not nice. No, but I would. But that's also part of it though, is that there's no corporate governance here. I mean, look at what's happening with Liu Changdong.
Yes, pretend I'm a Chinese person who's not wired with people in Hong Kong, or else I need to invest this money in China. Do I hold it in cash and hope for a brighter? I mean, what do I do? Or where are the better tech plays? I'm not letting you answer.
Well, okay, so let me tell you that. Let me say it this way. So Liu Changdong's been in the news for this alleged sexual assault.
The founder of JD.com.
Right. So he. So one of the big issues here is that basically he has run the entire company under him, right? So he has not designated into second in command, right? So if he goes down, the company goes down.
And that's very common for people who don't know China business. That's very common with China business. Not having a strong number two. And
they're raising money abroad. And so what's happening now is they're being sued by investors in the U.S. for basically being defrauded, by not following through on what they have committed. And JD, I own JD stock, and they're one of the more legitimate companies, right? But they're still, the corporate governance expectations for Chinese companies goes from, is just not what we are expecting in the, on global markets. Is just not what they're doing here. And it goes from being, completely fraudulent to, which happened especially like 6 or 7 years ago. A lot of these companies, if you ever see the documentary, The China Hustle.
I have seen excerpts from it. Okay. I want to see the whole film.
Where it was basically just companies completely fleecing investors overseas. Yeah. And then you have situations like this where the way that they basically set up a company in the U.S. that gets a share of their profits every year, and you invest in that, if you're going to invest in them overseas. So you're not actually, it's there's not the same access to the same kind of corporate governance, that you would have with a company that's registered in the U.S. or Europe. So you're always taking a gamble, and there's always, they go from legitimate companies that are somewhat shady to complete frauds. So I guess I don't know what I would do, man. I just bought JD stock and Tencent stock, and they're plummeting. So
did you buy it recently?
And Alibaba, I bought it like a month ago.
Wow, good timing.
So yeah, not good. But probably Tencent, Alibaba. But this is the issue. This is the issue that everyone's facing in China, is that there's all this cash. It needs returns, but where is it going to come from? And really what's needed is this economy has needed a recession for a long time because it cleans out a lot of the garbage.
Right.
But for a lot of reasons, it's
there are certain things not being allowed to fail, and certain things are being ankled because of other reasons.
Yeah, exactly. But there are plenty of, I like ByteDance a lot, but they're also, they're in a precarious situation because it's all, they can there's regulatory issues both at home and abroad, and they can also lose users very, very quickly.
Right.
Xiaomi, I think, has potential, and they're at a good price right now. If they can get their internet services up and running, then they're good.
But so what you're saying, and I appreciate that you actually put some specific faces on there because it helps to be relatable for people who follow this. But so generally speaking, there are some systemic issues that. What do you think is put on your? I don't know if I should ask you to get a crystal ball or look into the smoke. To see if you see
I think
anything,
ultimately it's a transparency issue.
Yeah.
It's that it's a rule of law issue. It's the fact that Tim Murray, who is he's the founder of or a partner at J Capital Research. He says that basically these companies or the laws that are written in China are often so broad, they're so broadly defined, and often so selectively enforced that at any moment it's impossible not to be violating the law, right? So I call it's like Schrodinger's cat, right? It's like Schrodinger's criminal is basically what I call it, right?
For people, I was a bit of a quantum physics geek, thanks to Robert Anton Wilson. People who don't get the reference, can you kind of explain that's very funny.
Schrodinger's cat is this metaphor by this guy Schrodinger to explain quantum mechanics or quantum superimposition, where basically like an electron both is there and isn't there at the same time, so it talks about a cat that is both dead and alive at the same time. Right. And so people use this to kind of talk about the theory of like the multiverse and stuff like that. But so in China, we have kind of Schrodinger's criminals, right? Where depending on how a law is enforced, everyone is either is both a criminal, innocent and guilty at the same time. So if that is the case, because there's not really rule of law, right? Because if you have broad kind of legal, if you have laws that are very, very much up to interpretation, the question is who is enforcing what and what are they deciding to enforce? So if you want to protect yourself as a company, what you want to be doing is being as untransparent as possible, right? Because there's no way to be legally compliant. Right? So then if that's the case, then one, as an investor, it's very hard to know if we don't know what the regulatory environment's going to be, you don't know how someone's going to fall out of favor with the government or whatever. So it's really hard to know what's going to happen with these companies, because largely because of the system, it's not really run by the market anymore. And the company, like this country, has never been fully run by the market, but they were moving in that direction. But since 2008, they kind of haven't. So it's so hard to know, where these companies are going, just because the entire environment is so unpredictable, and there's no system that you can rely on.
What do you think? And this is, it's opinion, pure speculation, and not wanting to, want to keep our visas intact, of course, and that's you don't need me to tell you that. But I'm saying that so that anybody who wonders why we didn't get more specific understands that there are other issues at play. What do you think the next few years, the short-ish, near-ish term looks like in terms of some of these issues related to debt and some of these companies and consumer activity and things like this? I mean, because you're so heavily you're so firmly planted in this. I think you're as well positioned as anyone to have a perspective. And if you look confused, I'm really in trouble.
Right. Well, I am confused by it. So we're getting to a point where the government doesn't. They're at a point, in the People's Bank of China is at a point where they need to. It's an addiction, right? They need to keep lending more in order to keep the economy going. But they can't keep doing that because it's going to end up completely either collapsing the economy or completely stagnating it. And so they have to find a way to rebalance, right? But they also, it's very hard to do those rebalancings without something that's very painful. And what they need is they need good tech firms. They need good 21st century, money making. They need Googles. They need
Apples.
They need more of these, right? Not just them. They need 100 of those, right? And then they need to find ways to redistribute that wealth as well. But there is so many obstacles. There are so many obstacles to all of these things that it's very hard to see how that will work. Best case scenario, I think, is I know people act like China is the next big superpower. In some ways, they are. But I think that the best case scenario is that they end up being somewhat like Japan's economy, in that it's very stagnant, but they're able to shift more into the consumer sector, where people spend more. Right? They use these gaming platforms somewhat. Some of these, these fashion platforms that are being used online. They're working in higher tech sectors. How they do higher end manufacturing. That's what Made in China 2025 is all about, and that's why they're so urgent about it too.
Yeah, because that's 7 years away.
Right, because they need. They're realizing that this debt problem is such a big they can't continue to have the economy functioning the way it is. Right now, just the cost of servicing their debt is 18% of total GDP. Right?
Jesus.
So and it's growing, right? Because they have to, in order to continue to stimulate the economy, they need to lend more and more every year, right? So the cost of servicing the debt keeps going up, but their economic growth is going down. So that's
not sustainable.
Exactly, it's not sustainable. The worst case scenario is that they end up having to take more from the spenders, right? From the consumers. Right. And
hence that new. They're not going to balance the books on the back of the expats, but there was the thing about the new tax scheme for people like me.
Yeah. So they're trying to, but they need people to have more money. Yeah. So it's they're really kind of boxing themselves in, into this kind of catch-22 where they're damned if they do, damned if they don't, and I do not envy what they're doing at the moment, or what they have to do. I do not envy those leaders right now. But that's also what Belt and Road is. Is that they want to keep some of these infrastructure companies alive instead of having to just completely put them on life support. But that's also very, very ambitious, and there's plenty of bumps in the road on that one.
Do you think that's going to be a panacea for a lot of these problems?
No, because I think that it doesn't really solve the issue, and I think that a lot of these companies just aren't equipped to do it, and these projects that they're working on aren't really economically feasible. Some of them are, but the incentive structures that are in place to make them work, there's so many issues. So it's hard to say, but it's hard to imagine that they would be able to, even if Belt and Road goes as well as it possibly can, it's still hard to imagine that it, kind of fixing their economic problems.
Right.
So, but maybe I'm just a pessimist. Maybe there's other ways out, but
maybe it adds a few chips to the stack that's needed to do it.
Yeah. And also it gives, if they do it successfully, it gives their tech companies more ways to globalize, and it gives them a whole new consumer markets. If Africa can kickstart its growth, and also Africa needs it.
Exactly.
And a lot of these developing countries, they're not, the IMF, the World Bank, they've really dropped the ball, because a lot of their investment there isn't always economically feasible. So China being able to say economic feasibility, not a big issue. Here, take the money. They're
the cultural / soft power type wins that may also encourage some of these adventures. Mm-hmm. I would think.
Yeah.
I mean, maybe not a driver. Maybe that's a cherry on top. If it works.
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of reasons. But yeah, I mean, if they can work, it's great for these countries. I just don't. I don't know how. A lot of it is just kind of offshoring their debt issue here, So yeah, I mean, like that's also a thing. It's like, working in focusing on Chinese business is like kind of peeling back. You kind of get discouraged by a lot of it. This is why
I was gonna say, what drives you to do this? Are you naturally masochistic?
I'm really curious about it, actually, because I think a lot of it was my LeEco experience.
Okay.
So being and seeing, when I joined LeEco, I knew it just something felt wrong, right? So something felt like why? How are they getting this money? Like they seem to be wasting a lot of money. How can they do these expansions? So what I did is I said, okay, well, I'm going to need this kind of offer. I'm going to need it to be structured in this way. And if they're able to give it to me, I'll take the job. And I situated my life so that I could, when the time came to leave, I was ready to leave. I don't have any children. My wife has a good job too. It's no big deal. But a lot of the people that I knew, they had bought stock.
They leveraged it a certain way.
In the company. They believed 100% because that's what they asked them to do. A lot of these companies are like, you have to be all in 100%, right? And
yeah, my girlfriend's like, oh, I have to go team building for my company on a weekend. Like, what?
But
we have to go, do like a.
But it's so obvious that it can't work with some of these companies. But it's so I was like, what? So there were these people they believed what was being told to them, and they are still owed money. Like, I'm not owed a dime from that company.
Because the way you're fortunate to be savvy enough to structure your deal.
Yeah, exactly.
And your own expectations in such a way
right.
that you.
And I was ready for.
You didn't drink the Kool-Aid.
Exactly, but the people who don't have, who are owed money, they're owed money because they listen to their managers. They're owed money because they're better employees than I was.
Ironically, yeah.
So I think that's what really upset me, is seeing these people who, a lot of the best ones, the ones who were
The people you would actually want working with,
Yeah,
you, who are going to
exactly.
do their best
Exactly.
to
These
be
people
awesome, to
who-
be a team player, and
Yeah.
then they get the really short end of the stick
Exactly.
shoved in the
Exactly.
unfortunate place.
Yeah, they got screwed over. And I think that really upset me. And then I just was like, what the hell? And then I started, just kind of looking at, how much of this happens elsewhere, what's common, what was, unique to that situation. And, so I just keep asking why. And then so I'm kind of down this rabbit hole.
Wow. I'll try. We'll dig. Yeah, we'll end on a positive note here somehow.
No, but I gotta say, like, there's also a lot of really exciting things, and there's a lot of really good people.
What are some of the I'm not a Pollyanna kind of guy, which people don't get that reference, is like always looking on the sunny side. But I mean, I feel like we've covered the reality well enough that we can afford ourselves a little bit of blue sky. What do you think some of the blue sky best case potentials are looking ahead? Well, I mean, generically or specifically, you don't have to try.
There are a lot of
anything.
companies out there that have good ideas and are trying to do good things, and there are a lot of really smart CEOs and founders out there that are trying to create good businesses. Now, I think it's there are a lot of them who end up getting swept up in circumstances that are out of their control, and they can't do what they want to do. There's others that are complete shitballs, and just trying to hose people out of money. But there's going to be a couple of really good ones. And like, is it enough to save the Chinese economy? I don't know about that, but there's some really cool people out there and who are doing some really cool things. And there's a lot of money floating around. And there are a lot of people taking advantage of it in ways that are not so great, but there are some people doing really good things.
What do you see yourself? What are the next couple 3-ish years look like for you in your imagining? And of course, anything can happen.
To be honest, I'm just really I fucking love this country, and I just find it to be, maybe it's it is somewhat masochistic, but I'm just really interested in it. So I'm interested in U.S.-China relations. That's a big deal. I think it's, and as being an American who knows, and writes a lot about China, I think that's it's an important thing and meaningful thing to do right now, to try to portray it in a way that is accurate and honest and empathetic as well. And
that's why I try to do this show.
Yeah.
And I'm having more Chinese people on the show, actually, for that reason.
And so, we'll see where it goes. I mean, to me, it's so much is about the relationships that I build with people here. And, just figuring out how I can help, and, kind of pursuing what I'm interested in, and, just going from there. So I am at a position in my life where I have, I can kind of pursue what I love. And we'll see how long that is, but that's what I'm doing right now. So I just pursue what I'm interested in, and just go with it. So it's very kind of, it doesn't sound very purposeful, but I have a very clear sense of values and kind of what's important to me, and but yeah, I just, however I can keep learning about this place and kind of share that with other people, even if I am somewhat of a Debbie Downer sometimes, I still like it.
Awesome. Do you see yourself actually living back here more regularly, or just visits?
I don't know. I think one thing I'm very, very passionate about right now is journalism in China, and Chinese journalism. So Chinese people who are doing Chinese journalism, because it's much harder than it used to be. There's a lot more that's off limits, and the people who do it are doing it for such little money, and they're heroic in what they do. So I have a whole new admiration for them. If I had the opportunity to do something like that, where I could, work with more of those people on a more regular basis, then that would be something that I'd be very interested in, and probably spend more time here if I could do that. But also, I love the way my life is right now, and I think also, it can be really easy if you're here, all the time to either get lost in this country and forget that the outside world exists, or just to become really disgruntled with it, where you have bad experiences and they're so emotionally close to you that it's hard to have perspective and see the good parts about this place, and there are many. So
that is one of the best ways to say that I can imagine. Elliott, thanks so much, man.
Yeah, sure, man. It's great to be here.
All right, that's the show this week. I hope you enjoyed it. Don't forget to find out more about Elliott, or to check out a little bit of his recent writing, or to contact him on his socials. You can check the links in the show notes at crazyinagoodway.com. Thanks again for listening, and I'll see you next time.